As a Warhammer 40K fan in the current time of the hobby, you have an almost unlimited amount of options to pick and choose from. If you want to start out slow and play the poster boys of the setting, a Space Marine army is never amiss in a hobbyist collection. Maybe you've had enough of big men in armor and want to collect a Drukhari force to spice up your hobby experience. You could choose from the world-eating Tyrannids, maybe even do a little orc army for the memes. Or if you're feeling extra spicy today, give those short boys of the Leagues of Voten a go. But maybe you don't want to think about and reason with your decision. Today, you have decided thoughts and reasoning are for peasants that don't deserve the Emperor's illumination. You want a 12-meter tall robot of mass destruction, guns and chainswords capable of leveling entire city blocks. You don't feel the need to argue about chaos or that kind of boring stuff. You want to blare your impossibly loud warhorn before ripping apart 5 named characters in the space of a singular turn, while your opponent is shriveled up in a fetal position behind the table. So today, my dear viewer, let's talk about the Imperial Knights, the knightiest and most noble of all Imperial factions. Imperial Knights are bipedal, 10 to 12 meter tall, heavy armed and armored, mechanical warsuits piloted by Knight Scions descending from noble houses. The noble households are divided into 2 main subcategories: the Imperium sworn Questor Imperialis and the Adeptus Mechanicus sworn Questor Mechanicus. These households usually own their own knight world, which they are sworn to protect at all times. Of course, being a highly potent military force, these knights are regularly called upon to serve alongside the Mechanicus and other Imperial armies, leaving their homeworld to go on righteous missions of raw destruction. Many Imperial commanders will rejoice at the sight of a knight household arriving to help them out, and even the poster boy Space Marines cheer at the reinforcement of such powerful allies. Imperial Knights are rightfully feared by the enemies of mankind across the galaxy, for wherever these war machines may stray, death and utter obliteration is soon to follow. Now that we have a basic idea of what these machines and knightly households are, let's take a look at their origins. Where did all this noble knight in shining armor actually come from? The knights were originally developed during the early years of the Long March, which was the initial spread of humanity's colonies across the stars. Their massive ships would travel for years, bringing entire populations of millions of people to new and unexplored planets. They would break their ships apart upon arrival, using the prepared materials to build functional bases of operation, and started producing machines and wargear to survive the local environment. Some planets were great: a nice sunshine, still oceans, beautiful fields of green, and only some minimal fauna. Other planets were not so great. The very nature would be hostile. Massive animals that stalked the forests would rip apart villages in mere moments. The oceans would hold creatures of the dark that would consume entire fishing establishments, and sometimes even the trees themselves would make short work of wandering trade caravans. But humanity came prepared for once. To reach the stars and colonize planets, they had developed an interactive AI to help them answer to any possible threat. These so-called STCs started producing massive warsuits, capable of being piloted by a human to easily kill dangerous fauna, and at times help with lumbering or even mining. Over time, these machines evolved, and their pilots slowly changed along with them. To help the knights in their task, the STC had implemented certain machinery that would slowly change the human pilot's mind within, feeling more protective of his people and more willing to swear fealty to local leaders. As the shadows of the end of the dark age of technology enveloped humanity, death and destruction ensued as the STCs and AI helpers of humanity turned against their creators. Most of humanity almost fell immediately, but those worlds that did manage to survive the AI onslaught were met with a fate much worse than death. During the grand years of the Long March, humanity had started to evolve. Psychically active humans would be born more regularly, allowing for a greater expanse into technology and gear that interacted with the warp. Humans had genetically engineered some of these gifted individuals, producing the first descendants of the Navigator's train. But, as with most sci-fi settings, many more of these witches and psychers would be left unnoticed. Planets that did not actively kill them fast enough would be hit with a second blast of utter destruction. If the AI uprising wasn't bad enough, warp travel had become completely impossible. The gods in the warp had become more active, and a wave of intense isolation and rampant mutation spread across the galaxy. Luckily for most of the Night Worlds, they were perfectly set up to degenerate into a complete feudal state, abhorring the idea of witches and mutants, and often cleansing their population for the fear of evil spreading amongst them. Even though they would lose most of their original technology, the Night households stayed in power through the sheer need of survival. If these feudal planets wanted to survive, their best chance was to listen to the big guy in massive robot armor. Multiple millennia of isolation later, and the very first Night households will be found by a mad lad in golden armor and a shitload of legions of biologically engineered superhumans. Many Imperial Night Worlds were happy to be reunited with the rest of humanity, and swore fealty to both the Great Crusade and Mars. Their planets had remained untouched by chaos, and would act as a perfect staging ground to rebuild the Imperium of mankind upon. They reinforced the Astartes legions during their many campaigns, earning many honors and victories for their kings and queens. They made trade deals with local Fortworld to protect them in return for materials and tech help, and would allow tech priests to search their planets for remaining STC relics. During the cataclysm of the Horus Heresy that saw the Imperium torn apart right down the middle, as the Emperor's own son Horus would betray his father in one of the most bloody wars ever, a large number of the Night houses would side with Horus in chaos. Even though this war cost more than the Imperium was ever meant to expand, the traitor forces of Chaos were pushed back into the reality-breaking Eye of Terror, where they would be held at bay for almost 10,000 years. Now in the 42nd millennium, Imperial Knights are an incredibly active part of the Imperium's fighting forces, usually fighting alongside their bigger brother Titan legions, fighting as freeblades on personal missions of righteous fury, or as reinforcements of the Adeptus Mechanicus as they venture out for new relics or to protect their valuable fort worlds. So, entire history and lore aside, what sets these big boys apart from the rest of 40k? Besides just looking fucking awesome, because you can't really goof up 12-meter tall war robots. No matter how you spin it and sprinkle it with some of that 40k goodness, it will almost always cultivate a massive fanbase. I think their focus on that feudal era knightlyhood adds a really nice twist to them. To be a Knight Scion is to be a noble warrior that wants to protect his people, no matter what the cost could be. Hell, even becoming a Scion. It's already a dangerous task in itself. The honor of piloting such a war machine is incredible, but it can come at a fatal cost. A young 18-year-old aspiring pilot has to actively tame the machine spirit of his warsuit. He will be plugged in at nightfall and will be left alone till morning come to fight with the feral machine spirit and tame it, or get completely fried in the process. When this process is successfully completed, the Scion works in tandem with the machine spirit to fluently pilot the war machine. Over time, this alters the way he perceives the world, and as we saw in the history of these machines, it actively places thoughts and feelings of fealty and nobility in the individual. Upon death, a part of the pilot's soul will even be taken by the machine spirit itself, getting added to the massive collection of past pilots that will each help influence the next young Scion. Living on the Night World as a peasant isn't as great as you'd imagine either. 1400s Europe wasn't a nice place, and most Imperial knightly households will not want their people to be highly technologically advanced. Keeping the people safe, even from themselves, will always be the most noble option for these warriors. Time to get into the actual review part of this video. First off, lore positives. Without trying to sound too much like a fanboy for these big warboys, I think just about everything in their lore can be written down as a big fat W. For what is considerably quite a new faction, their lore is quite well written out. The most well-known knightly houses are written out in great detail, and even have individual art pieces to help you visualize your own knight army just like them. There is a great variety between these households, and there will be a color scheme and backstory that will really catch your imagination. I don't want to go into too much detail with the individual factions in this video, but I personally quite enjoy House Orlak. Their purple and gold color scheme is quite reminiscent of one of my favorite Space Marine legions, and their backstory of being based on a death world with absolutely awful fungus and parasites is really cool. There's a little bit of everything for anyone and everyone. Even if you don't enjoy the existing knight households, the lore is written in a very clear way where you could easily write and produce your own custom homebrew household. Hell, maybe you don't even like the idea of your knight being from an existing household. Maybe he's the lone survivor of some cataclysmic event, a lone warrior perusing the borders of the Imperium, reinforcing your other Imperial army / collection as he hunts down the murderers of his family. Maybe it's some crazy girl with a little too high standard for herself, as she constantly gets herself and her knight suit in dangerous situations. If you like the idea of feudal worlds, knights in shining armor protecting their people, and noble households deciding how things go for a population, there is really nothing to complain about. It's a nice balance against the constantly grimdark Imperium of mankind. Not every imperial story has to happen in a hive city. Sometimes some random farmer fighting off a chaos-corrupted great beast as he gets helped out by a noble imperial knight is pretty cool too. On the gameplay side of things, you'll be happy to know that playing Imperial Knights is exactly like you'd imagine it to be. Having an army completely comprised of 36 feet tall robots of mass destruction apparently works quite well in tabletop wargames. If your opponent didn't bring the right tools for the job, he's gonna be having quite a hard time actually dealing with your units. You can decide to stand still and obliterate your opponent from a distance, as most of your guns do an obscene amount of damage and they are essentially upscale tank guns. So they have a great range to boot. Maybe you like to play a bit more aggressively. Well, big war machines are quite good at crunching little flashy soldiers. With stomping alone, you can crush dozens of guardsmen in a single turn. And if you need a little extra punch, the 4-meter long chainsword or Space Marine sized power fist will make short work of anything left standing. Even though the models are individually quite expensive, both money and points wise, you only need like 5 of them to fill out an entire army. For less than 700 euros, you have a playable, very competitive, nearly indestructible army of awesome war machines that are a pleasure to paint as well. Yes, you will struggle with capturing a large amount of objectives, but once you plonk down one of your boys in the right position, your opponent is gonna have a very hard time trying to shift him. For units, you'd also be surprised you actually have a decent range of options. Each loadout is technically a different unit. So you have paladins, errants, wardens, gallants, preceptors, crusaders, castellans, valants, and even the brand new archeron, castigators, and lancers. To fill out the empty gaps in your points, you can even sprinkle in some armiger warglaves or the shooty helverins to help capture those last couple necessary objectives. No matter what, you will always have an easy time playing these guys. And for beginning players, they are a great way to assure some early career wins, and are a blast to paint and build. Painting 7 to 8 miniatures is a hell of a lot easier and faster than painting 60 plus. Now, for lore negatives. With the constant positivity throughout this video, I kinda feel the need to do a bit of a hot take. I guess this is a good time as any to remind you that this is a definitely unbiased review. So what I'm about to say is of course 100% correct, and should be followed to the letter if you do not want the Inquisition coming after you. Within the setting, we know there are about 1 million livable planets underneath the banner of the Imperium. Within these, we see an insanely wide range of cultures and approaches to how to live the imperial life. We have seen time and time again that local populations heavily influence those imperial forces that descend from them. Cadian troops are known for their glowy purple eyes and very specific style of organized warfare. The Death Corps of Krieg are deeply scarred and changed by their past wars. The Catechans are perfect jungle fighters and individually much stronger than other imperial regiments. Even within the Space Marines, we see the Ultramarines themselves be this royal Roman Empire, with perfect features and perfect organization. Yet, when we look at one of their successor chapters, a direct descendant from their genetic code, the world they recruit from heavily influences their end result. Instead of Roman and proud, through their world's rituals and recruits, within only a couple thousand of years, the mortifactors have degenerated into cannibalism and superstition. Now, my main problem with the Imperial Knights is the fact that they are all knights. How did hundreds of separate planets, hundreds of separate cultures, completely isolated from each other for multiple millennia, end up in the exact same state, with the exact same style, and in the end, with the exact same feudal system? Yes, there are nuances. There are tiny separating factors between the households, but how are they all generally the same? It could be argued that during the Long March, one perfect knight STC was sent around to all colonies, and was implemented just about everywhere. This template held the side effect of creating more effective nobles and knightly scions, and this then simultaneously influenced all human planets that actively use these. But to be quite frank with you, I think it's a little bit lazy on the writer's side. In other franchises, we regularly see other cultures greatly represented in their big mechanical robots. Where is my samurai household? Where is my Aztec household? To constantly repeat the same theme over hundreds of separate planets just seems a bit excessive. And I would like to see Games Workshop slightly broaden the horizon for which cultures influence specific knight empires. For the Imperial Knights, like I have mentioned before, there aren't that many gameplay negatives. You will struggle with secondary objectives, and a badly positioned knight can easily be caught off guard by specialized tank killing units. You need to really focus down your objectives for the game, and if you can't win on capturing objectives, you will have to try to quickly obliterate the enemy army before they can outscore you. Also, the loss of just one of your units is an incredible blow to your army. Each one of your guys is a mini titan, which is usually the largest unit in the enemy army. Losing just one instantly kills like 20% of your entire force. So don't get too overzealous or too confident. Try to find enemy threats before they get too close and lock your opponent out of advantageous positions. Oh boy, community reception time. I think we can all agree, when these bad boys were launched into the setting in their brand new glorious plastic form, we all collectively lost our shit. The models look great, the weapons look terrifying, the armor is large and smooth, ripe for the fanciest of freehand attempts. Their decal sheets are covered in a plethora of incredibly interesting and detailed iconography. On the model side, it is only positivity. From the small armiger to the larger knights, all the way to the massive castellans. The entire range is perfect for unlimited conversion ideas and perfect personalization of just about every element. And then we get to the rules. Imperial Knights are simply overpowered. They might not be as good as the Eldar at this very moment, but few things beat those pointy-eared bastards in 10th edition. Knights, just for what they are, will always be a menace on the tabletop. And with a single Google search, you will find dozens of online posts arguing for their removal from the game or tournaments. I personally like the miniatures and lore over the tabletop, so for me, this has never really been an issue. But I can imagine for those sweatlords who like to play the game competitively, Imperial Knights will have caused many irredeemable headaches. Now time to cover my favorite Imperial Knight, Sir Hector the Chainbreaker. This mad lad is the last remaining noble from his knight world, and the only one to escape alive from the Iron Warrior's Chaos Space Marines that absolutely decimated it. His knight, called Canis Rex, activated on its own and through feral rage and cunning tactics, managed to help his Scion escape. Sir Hector saved what remained of his people and now sails the stars as the Chainbreaker, the last knight of House Cerebran and the enemy of Chaos and all those who would chain Imperial people. Also, his model looks incredible. He even has a little separate pilot model. So, circling back to the main reason you're probably watching this video, are the Imperial Knights the army for you? I think you should have a decent idea of how they came to be and what they are doing now in the setting. You know there are many game positives, and who needs friends anyway when you can win tournament after tournament? If you like big stompy robots, amazing miniatures that you don't need a lot of, if you like a wide range of options for color schemes and household names, and if you enjoy being the knightliest knight that has ever knighted, then the Imperial Knights might be the army for you. Thank you for watching, you are the Scion to my knight construct. If you haven't already, make sure to watch my unbiased Custodes review. We break them down just like in this video. And it would make me happy if you gave it a look. Thank you for all your support, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.
お帰りなさいませ、ご主人様。Welcome to the Night Cafe.